Good morning, everyone. This is Brian Laughlin with Intel Solutions. Thank you for joining us this morning for this very important webinar. This one's going to be a little different than what we've done in the past. We have a guest speaker here today. I'd like to introduce Stuart Crawford of Ulistic. Ulistic's a business partner that Intellis has been working with for the last several years for our marketing efforts. His company is based out of Florida, and he's here to speak about his recent experiences with Hurricane Irma. Before we get started, I just want to let everyone know we are recording today's session, and the transcript and the recording of today's webinar will be up on Intellis.com website shortly after the conclusion of today's webinar. So let's jump in. Stuart, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for the opportunity to do this. I really appreciate it. As Brian mentioned, we've been working with Intellis for a few years now, and we behind the scenes are the marketing arm for part of the marketing arm for Intellis. We help them go to market, and our company is based now in Florida, and I'll get a little bit into the history of us in a bit here. But if for those people that are familiar with area codes, you're wondering why a Florida company has a 716 area code. Like I said, I'll get into that in a second. But we've been in business for 8 years, and we've helped ID companies just like Intellis around the country go to market, and we're very happy to be working with the team at Intellis and helping them with a number of different marketing strategies. I got my start in this business just like what Intellis is doing today. I ran a managed services practice in Western Canada. I sold that business about 10 years ago now, and decided to move to my hometown in Niagara Falls, Ontario in Canada. And after several years in the Falls, my wife and I decided to move to Florida, and it's really somewhere we wanted to retire to one day. So that's a little bit of the history about us, and I'm sure the content or the program for today is going to consist of Brian asking me a few questions on our experience with Irma, and what we did to run our survive this storm and continue to operate our business. We are a small business of 20 or so people. So some of the things that we went through, I'm sure can relate to a lot of you on the call today.
Well, thanks, Stuart, for the background. So first off, I know the storm was really tough, and is the family okay? House survived? How's the business doing?
Yeah, if you look at the picture, Brian, this is actually just down the street from my house. It's the Murphy's gas station in Sebring, and you can see that a telephone or power pole just crashed on the sign. That was a common sight around Sebring, and for those people that are not familiar where Sebring, Florida is, we call it the heartland of Florida. It's right in the central part of the state, about an hour south drive of Orlando, and about 90 minutes from each coast. So we're kind of sandwiched right in the middle of the state. And thankfully, our house did pretty good. We didn't have any significant damage to our house. Our office, the only thing that happened at our office was my neighbor. We share an office building with another company, and their cell phone booster tower, collapsed, which was very, just a small 6 or 7 foot antenna on the top of the building. But I had a rental property, 3 or 4 miles around from where I live, and we have to get a complete roof redone for that. But thankfully, personally, everything was okay. But it could have been a lot worse.
So I know you had some pretty good timing just moving your business recently to Florida, so good job on that one. But before you moved to Florida, was this your first, really big business interruption or disaster that you've been through, or have you had that sort of thing before?
Well, believe it or not, I've had 4 kind of interruptions to our business, 3 with Ulistic and 1 with another company that I used to have with a friend of mine. And that was in 2003 when Hurricane Juan hit Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I had to actually go look it up on Wikipedia the other day to see what kind of storm it was. But it came right up from the Bermuda, right up the Atlantic, and hit Eastern Canada pretty hard. I had a web hosting company back then, and we were doing hosted exchange before hosted exchange was cool. Brian, we were running Exchange 5.5, so you can understand how painful it was technically to run hosted exchange on Exchange 5.5. But that that knocked us right out. We had, we had everything in place, generator-wise, redundant internet through our telecom provider at the time. But we found out after the storm went through, they couldn't get fuel, and the building operator didn't want to run the generators because he couldn't get fuel to refuel the generators. So that was the first one. So I basically sold that business right out after the storm hit, and it wasn't my main focus anyway, so it wasn't a main financial hit for us. But in 2014, I personally had a medical emergency that took me out. Thankfully, it was over the Canada Day, Independence Day long weekend, so July 1st to the 4th. But that helped me understand that I had to be I had to get more people on our team. So we recently expanded our team after that, brought on some key people. So I realized that I couldn't put all our eggs in one basket with me being the main person. And then 2015, Ulistic has a web team over in Nepal. We have about 20 people working for us over there on a contract basis. But if you knew, in 2015, there was a huge earthquake that happened in Nepal, and that kind of interrupted things. So every interruption to business was a learning experience. So we realized that we need to have some backup web developers and web team, and either over there on site or over here in the States. And of course this year with Hurricane Irma. So learned a lot over the years, Brian. And some will say that, why did you move to Florida? Well, I left this. This is Buffalo, New York. We had an office. This is from the view from our office in downtown Buffalo, New York. The day, I think this was like 2014, the day that the 7 feet of snow fell in New York, and that had forced the Buffalo Bills to move their game to Detroit that weekend. And it significantly impacted business in the south towns of New York, or of the Buffalo area. And so, it's not, what I learned about this, it's not only hurricanes and other weather things, something like as freak as a snowstorm like this. And you can see, if anybody's familiar with Western New York, Buffalo sits on the eastern shore of Lake Erie, and that wind blows across. I think this was November timeframe. The wind blows across that lake and just basically created a wall of snow and dumped 7 feet of snow in the in the south towns of Buffalo. And I just looked at how much money did the Buffalo Bills lose that weekend when they couldn't play a home game at Ralph Wilson Stadium. How much did they lose in concessions and the refunds of tickets and things like that to move everything, and the cost to move the team to Detroit to play a game. So it really, even though my small business financially wasn't a big hit, that's a bigger organization, and I imagine the financial hit to them was huge. And we're going to get into this, Brian, as we go through. This is not about data backup. This is just about operations. So, just that impact alone cost them a lot of money.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up in terms of the differences between kind of disaster recovery or backup and business continuity. We've had a number of clients. It doesn't just have to be with natural disasters, but we've had a number of clients from an owner of a company on a Friday afternoon chipping a golf ball down the hallway and knocks off a sprinkler head and floods their entire office space, including their server room, to things like just water main breaks. We had a water main break for a client who had everything on-prem. They were in an office building that was highly secure. They had a very expensive server room, great HVAC unit. They had backup generators that were diesel fueled for the entire building. They had specific fuel contracts with the different fuel companies, so they would be priority instead of the normal gas stations and everything. And all of a sudden, a water main broke right in front of their office, and they turned the generators on. And those generators lasted for a good 12 to 14 hours, and the fuel got burned up. But even though they had these fuel contracts with the trucks couldn't get to the generators, so they couldn't fill up the tanks. So it also happened to be in the middle of the summer, so it was like 90, 95 degrees in the DC metro area. And so we were, doing everything we could to, have guys in there and open up the doors and shut down critical systems and do all that stuff on a best effort basis. We kept them going for a good couple days and moved some stuff off site to be able to keep them up and running with their critical systems. But it was definitely a hit. And they're a nonprofit organization, but it's definitely a hit for their business and the fact that they weren't able to serve their members, along with not being able to take donations and accept dues and things like that. And if you look at over what your revenue is over a year, and you have to shut down for 3 or 4 days, that can be very significant. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a hurricane or a gigantic snowstorm for it to be very impactful for a business.
Yeah, and I've had same stories, Brian, with my MSP days of just something as simple as a pipe bursting in an office building and flooding a server room. These things happen, and what my experience is, the hurricane gave us 5 or 6 days warning. How do you plan for stuff that happens, like chipping a golf ball down the hallway? One of those things that just you plan for the worst and hope it never happens, right? But that's the case, right? So bang on with a lot of that stuff, when Irma really hit us as a Category 2 storm. Like the eye wall basically just came, like the right edge of the eye wall came like right over top of us. And if anybody's been in a storm before, it's the right side of the storm is the worst side of the storm. So we got pretty much got hammered consistently for several hours, and I wasn't there myself. I'll get into that in a second, but from what I hear, and we had some systems in place, it was getting pretty bad in that area, and this storm literally shut us down for 7 to 10 days, depending on who you speak with. Some areas of the county were hit harder than others. Not for Ulistic, though. As I said, I learned from my past experiences, Brian, and it was great to have that plan in place.
So what, Stuart, did you learn from your past experiences?
So Highlands County was hit really hard, like I said, but Governor Scott said that we're the second hardest hit county in the state. 95% of the residents and businesses were without power for days. Businesses were destroyed, Brian. Like, this is our local bowling alley. It was, it caught on fire, and the firefighters couldn't make it there. It's so, they can't, it's because the winds were so high. It was, we had people. This is a picture I took of us during our evacuation. That was one of the things that that I learned, that I didn't need to be a hero. I had to keep the business running, the house and the office and all that other stuff. We could rebuild that, but I couldn't rebuild me and the key people in our company. So we left immediately. So that was part of our business continuity plan. If forewarned, the key personnel were required to leave the impact area. So this picture here was just a picture of us, waiting in line. I think it was like 3 or 4 in the morning at a gas station along US 98 on the way up to our evacuation location. And like I said, the eye went right through Highlands County. This is a picture I snapped on my phone from some weather app I had on my smartphone. And it shows, Lake Okeechobee there on it. That's, where that red dot is pretty much where we are. So, we got hit really hard with the dirty side of the storm, and the high winds run right through us. So, but what I learned, Brian, from my past experiences, I needed to be prepared, and prepared we were.
So how did Ulistic prepare in advance for Irma?
So, like I said, we thought we were prepared, and I think we were pretty good. I talked about earlier, we had an evacuation plan for owners and key employees. So my business partner, who just happens to be my wife as well, we took off and went to Mobile, Alabama, and rode the storm out there. So we were pretty safe where we were at. We picked an area. The basic business continuity plan says we have to be out of the impact area. So I looked at this map here and said, okay, where can we go? We had we had a place in Myrtle Beach that we can go to. A cousin of mine has a place that she rents out in Myrtle Beach. We could have went there. But then, watching the predictions on the storm surge, maybe that's not a good place to go. And we knew that west was going to be kind of, if it was going to get hit a little bit, and Mobile got hit a little bit with Irma, just a little bit of wind, but no rain. we knew going west was going to be the right way because everybody was going north. Like everybody evacuated into Georgia and Atlanta, and even Atlanta got tropical storm force winds. So this was our first hurricane. We weren't necessarily as prepared as we thought for it, but we learned a few things. We had a business continuity plan done up, with a bunch of what if scenarios. We knew that Florida was prone to tropical cyclones. You just watch the news from June to November every year. It happens. I think one of the smartest things that we did, Brian, giving us that we're a small business, and I understand a lot of businesses don't have this luxury. We moved as much as we can. In our case, it was almost everything into the cloud. So we use Microsoft Office 365 extensively for our email and calendaring, and a number of the other features of OneDrive and things like that are found in Office 365. We have a voice over IP phone system that's hosted in the cloud, and that allowed us to keep our phones up and running. And we work with Basecamp, and Basecamp is our project management file storage in the cloud. So I felt confident in our ability to keep our data safe and keep core businesses running like email and phone systems. And that at least kept business operations going. And we also had a failover because we have an office in Canada still. So we moved over a lot of critical operations to our Canadian office. I kind of went back and forth about going up to Canada and working out there, but we decided to drive to Mobile instead. We had a backup office ready to go in Lakeland, Florida, just in case we needed to go there. And we have a client in Lakeland that was gracious enough for us to allow us to borrow some space if we needed it. But I'll get into some of the problems that we had there. We had a personnel evacuation plan just in case we needed to get more people out of the area. And some of our key employees did leave. Some went to Louisiana, some went up, like I said, up to Georgia, and others went to different parts of the country. Excuse me. We had one of the key things now during the storm that we implemented before the storm even hit. We got everybody's cell phone numbers, and we implemented an SMS strategy, so a text messaging strategy to check in with everybody during the event, because we knew that phones, getting a voice conversation was going to be hard to get, that cell coverage, but we knew that text messaging would have a better way of getting through. And actually what we found out after the storm, that sometimes even text messaging was delayed, in some situations up to 24 hours getting into some people. And we also used an application called Zello, which is, I know for sure it's on the iPhone, but I'm not sure about any other smartphones. But Zello allowed us to have voice communication, and it uses your data plan and Wi-Fi to, have almost like a walkie-talkie type thing. So during the storm, as everything was happening in Highlands County, to during the storm to after the storm, we used these key communication methods just to keep in touch with everyone, just make sure everybody was okay, and that everybody, everybody was safe. So that was critical for us to make sure, all of our key employees were safe, and there was, and then we also had people, go to our homes and make sure everything was fine. The aftermath was, what we didn't plan for was the lack of gasoline. And, I know I experienced this back in Hurricane Juan that, that we couldn't get fuel. And I just thought because it was the trees that were down and things like that. But the amount of, the lack of gasoline coming into Florida caused a huge problem. And getting back to that office we had signed up in Lakeland, which is about an hour away from where we live, people couldn't get there because they couldn't fuel up their cars. We didn't really plan for the extended power outages that occurred as well. Like, we didn't have any power in our home until the Friday. So the storm hit on Sunday. We didn't have power until Friday, and we didn't get internet until Tuesday. So we were out without internet for 8 days or so. And then also the lack of cell coverage and oversubscribed mobile communications presented a huge challenge for us, because even though people can get a cell connection, it was hard for them to get data connection. So some, people couldn't work on a tethered smartphone as a kind of a secondary or tertiary kind of communication method, just because the lines were oversubscribed or even non-existent. And the one thing areas that I kind of overlooked was the employee hardship after a storm. it was an emotional time for people because their homes either were damaged or loved ones had medical issues or things like that. So, we had to factor in just people not being able to come to work because of just their own personal hardships because of because of the storm, Brian.
Is everybody okay now?
Oh yeah, everything's fine. Everything, business. We had one guy who came back middle of last week, and he was just waiting for his internet to get restored. But everybody's fine, and business is back to somewhat normal.
Good. Well, I'm glad everyone's okay. You mentioned earlier that you had the luxury of having some semi-advanced notice of this disaster coming. In terms of your plans, what other disasters or interruptions are part of your plan, and how are you prepared for them?
Well, like I said, luckily we had enough notice here. So this is a screenshot I took back in just as everything was firing up. We had we had 3 hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin and the Gulf, in 1 week, and it caused a little bit of uncertainty in what we were looking at doing, and then we also find that that some storms just don't give any notice. What we talked about here, fire theft, golf balls being chipped into sprinkler heads, freak storms, human error, man-made issues. I think I put the golf ball one there. Power outages and internet outages. We after Irma, we needed to build a robust plan. So here, this is our office, and the thing that happened with our office, even though I think the office was back to normal, like the actual physical office was back to normal a few days after the storm. We couldn't get there because the road was impassable due to a flash flood. So kind of like what your story was, Brian, about the fuel trucks getting in. So we couldn't even get to the office even if we wanted to. So one of the key learnings we had was everybody needs to have that remote access just to keep things up and running. So we gave, obviously we're cloud-based too, so, that was easy to get everybody, up to, some sort of remote access and keep them running. And, the other things that we also learned too was, backup power. So, we're in the middle of getting a new backup power system. This just happened to be the system that I bought, a 20 kilowatt generator that's going to run on natural gas because the natural gas lines are all buried where the power lines are in the air here. Natural gas is buried. And with natural gas, I don't have to worry about fuel resupply. So we decided to go the natural gas route for our generators, so backup power, just make sure we keep everything up and running. We're also looking into getting a backup internet service because Brian, we've been working for a number of years now. We know that a lot of our business is done on the internet, so we need to have that redundancy. We didn't like I said, we didn't get our Comcast circuit back up for almost 8 days after the storm. Lucky enough, I came back on the Saturday from being evacuated, and I was able to get an LTE data coverage off of my cell provider. But that runs out after a while, and people are limited by bandwidth. And so having some sort of backup internet is important. Making sure we have adequate fuel supply. So this is a picture of my trunk of my car, right? From I think last week when I went to Home Depot. We have empty jerry cans of gas sitting at the office and then in my house too. So if another hurricane was coming up this way, at least ahead of time, I can go out and fuel up the the jerry cans of gas. So people needed gas to get to a remote location. We had some backup fuel supply as well. So we just make sure the little things, Brian, are looked after.
Excellent. Yeah, I remember when Hurricane Sandy hit. I'm from New Jersey originally, and when Hurricane Sandy hit and my family was out of power for several weeks, I filled up a bunch of those cans and grabbed a couple generators where I could find them, and I drove up there, and I had my SUV filled with them. And as soon as I got close, I had to cover everything with blankets because I was afraid I was going to get jumped and they were going to steal all my gasoline and generators because it was so scarce up there, and it was getting cold at that point. So I hear you there.
Yeah, exactly. It's scary. Even I know one thing we haven't even talked about was the potential crime impact, right? Lucky enough for us, we didn't have any of that here. So we were fortunate in Highlands County. We didn't have that problem compared to what some people in Miami or Fort Lauderdale went through.
Yeah, we have a partner in Fort Lauderdale, and even more of an impact because he owns a managed services business, just some of what we do. And not only was he dealing with his own business and getting his own business up and going after the impact of the hurricane, but he was also having to do that for all of his clients, who, some of them weren't as prepared as they necessarily should be. So along that same lines, if a business has never looked at, or thought of some of the things you've talked about today, what do you recommend for getting started on a business continuity plan?
So, very basic ideas. And a good friend of mine, Lester Kaiser, you may know Lester from the HTG world, Brian.
Yep.
Lester taught me this very valuable lesson. And I have a funny story about Lester and I. We were doing a business continuity plan business continuity presentation in Calgary the day the Calgary floods happened. But one of the things he taught me was take just a simple Google map. Right now, this is a Google map of Sebring, and start looking at what are all the possible, things that can go wrong. Right. So if you look at our office, we're kind of isolated outside of the city. So we had that issue with Schumacher Road being impassable. But what other things could happen here? Look for things like railroad tracks. And what do railroad tracks carry? Well, they sometimes carry hazardous cargo. And just go and spend a few hours out there and take note of all the signs that are in the back of some of these oil tankers or these tanker cars and things like that, and go look up those codes, and they'll tell you what's being transported on those railroad tracks. We had a client years ago that was in Mississauga, Ontario, the day the train derailment happened there, and they evacuated the whole city of Mississauga, 750,000 people. So there's a lot of that could be something as simple as as you mentioned, the chipping the golf ball down the hall type thing, right? So, but look at a Google map and see what potential businesses, what other businesses are in the area too. Lester pointed out to me one time about a gunpowder manufacturer was around the corner from his office. Well, there's a risk there, right? So look at Google Maps and just do a very basic review of everything going around your office. Do some research online too. I looked at, when I decided to move here, I did a search on hurricane risk in Sebring, and this page is a little dated. I haven't updated it since Irma, but found out, that Sebring's a very low risk area. Being in the center of the state, the last, storm came through here prior to Irma was in 2008. So, it's fairly low risk. So, the internet has a bunch of good stuff. I did also continue with my search. I looked at USA.com, and they came up with a bunch of things like tornado in tornado, earthquakes, all the risks associated with that. Very, very important to kind of get doing your research, and then check with your state or federal, state, and municipal governments too. They'll often have a bunch of resources that are available to you as well. And FloridaDisaster.org has a lot of great resources to create a business plan around business continuity and disaster recovery. So, they often have some great places for you to start as well. This topic, Brian, is so extensive. There's lots of things, there's lots of areas on it that we can, we can focus on. But I tell you, the one lesson I learned, and keep going back to this, is that downtime costs money. And so the more time that we're down, the more money we're losing as a business. So we really needed to, make sure we maximize our efficiencies. Like I said, human capital, although very, very important, sometimes I can live with somebody being away for 2 or 3 days while they take care of their personal stuff. But that 2 or 3 days of downtime, like you mentioned with the nonprofit there, not being able to take dues and take donations and stuff, is crippling to a business. So, whatever we can do to keep that business flowing is, crucial importance. And then ultimately it comes down to training. So, we are going to be conducting, this was our big aha moment for me, was sometime next year before hurricane season starts up again, we're going to do, and I'm not going to announce it to my staff. One morning I'm going to wake up and say the office is flooded and we can't get to the office. Everybody work from home. And, and let's throw our business continuity plan into place, and let's see what let's see how it works. My wife and I will simulate that we've left town, and we'll throw in our whole plan and work remotely for a day that way. Kind of like the old school fire drills we used to do in elementary school and grade school. Just to make sure that everybody's prepared for the what if scenario. And that to me, it starts with training. We're this month coming up in October is California has their shakeout program, and on the 19th, I think it's the 19th of October, we're going through a whole simulation earthquake drills with people out there, just to make sure everybody knows and is trained. Training is so imperative to making sure people are ready, and you can't do enough on the training side to make sure that everybody knows exactly what to do in case of a disaster. But like I mentioned earlier, Brian, you also got to think of the technology side of things. And, you and I have talked about this numerous times. There's so much more than just, data protection to a business continuity plan. And often a lot of IT companies get mixed up and confuse business continuity with disaster recovery and data backup. But I know Intellis does a lot of work on the data backup side as part of a business continuity plan. So do you want to go into kind of some of the details, Brian, of what you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I still remember this when I first started back in 2003 with our company. I was coming out of college. I didn't really know much about the business and everything. And the founder of our business, Michael Gallahan, said, the most important thing to always have is a good backup. If you have a good backup, we can fix it. And I'll say times have changed. You're no longer using tape drives and stuff like that. You're using a lot of different technologies out there. You identified a couple on your presentation here, who we partner with, and there's a lot of different backup organizations that we partner with. But that's still the case. Having a backup, as long as we have a backup, a good backup, and a good backup strategy, which is off-site or online somewhere, that's the first step. But there's a lot of other pieces to that. That things you've mentioned. If you don't have power, you can't get there, or you can't get to the internet, or if you don't have cell phone coverage or electricity, you can't use your phone because the cell phone towers don't have, their generators have ran out of fuel, or things like that. So there's a lot of other cases where you kind of have to manage your risk. Most of our clients, if their office doesn't have power, they can go to Starbucks, or have their people go home or do whatever and work. If they're not physically directly being affected at that time. We do have the luxury these days of a lot of their infrastructure is either being hosted in a separate secure data center facility where they do have all these generators and solar panels and all that kind of stuff, and are earthquake resistant and tornado resistant and all those types of things, and can run for weeks without outside coverage. Or they're in like a cloud-based hosting facility like Microsoft Azure, where they can we can make sure that their servers are up and running. Or most of our clients are in Office 365, so their email and critical systems they use there are capable of running and being supported and not being affected. But there's those other pieces that go into that business continuity plan, like the staffing, like the physical types of things that you can't necessarily control, but you can plan for. And I'd say that's the most important, as you said earlier, it's the old Boy Scout motto, be prepared. We have absolutely helped a lot of our clients with creating disaster recovery or business continuity plans. It's all about the scale and the scope of what organizations are looking to do. And so sometimes it's from a compliance perspective. Sometimes it's more for a much more detailed strategy around some of the things you had mentioned, Stuart, like evacuation plans and physical type of risks. But depending on where you are, you can basically identify the risks and then figure out a strategy in each one of those risks, how you're going to either mitigate it, or sometimes the strategy is, Well, if that happens, we got a lot bigger problems on our plate than, than keeping the business up for, and running, because people aren't going to be working anyway because they're going to be tending to more important things. So we'd be glad to help out and in any way for helping plan for some of these things. We have templates for kind of a sample disaster recovery plan that we are going to be, I think, posting in the next several days. And we'll make sure that anyone who attended today's session are notified on that. Like I said, we've done strategic engagements with other organizations to help. And we also have partners. So we have a lot of experience in the technology side of things. But in terms of the people planning and that sort of thing for these types of activities, we have trusted partners that can help out and provide input and analysis in those areas.
And Brian, if I can add a couple of things here, another thoughts here is that, you can't plan for everything, but you can plan for what you know. If you are close to an airport, for example, you can plan for what if a runway, a plane overshoots the runway like it did in Toronto a few years ago, or in Buffalo, I can't remember the exact date, but I think it was either 10 or 20 years ago, somewhere in that time frame, where a small Continental, turboprop plane landed short of the runway. And if you've ever flown into Buffalo before, there's a throughway and a number of businesses there. Sometimes these disasters, it may not physically impact you, but it impedes your way for your staff to get to the office. So, although you can't prepare for everything, you can prepare for, what you think can be, impact. And, what I learned over the years, Brian, is that you can plan for everything. And then there's going to be some little area that you just never even thought of, like chipping a golf ball down a hallway, right?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Stuart. Appreciate you sharing all this with everybody. I hope it was people can learn from Stuart's experiences, both personally and professionally. Also, and tell us for anyone for the people who attended. This webinar is donating towards the Hurricane Irma Relief Fund. So thank you. Your attendance has led to some financial help, hopefully, for the victims of the hurricane. If you'd like to catch back up with us, please follow us on social media. Here's some of our links to our social media sites. And I think with that, we were going to take some questions in the chat.
Yeah, so I think I got it open here, Brian. I'm just going to have a quick look and see. So, one person asked about, just the impact to your business locally. Obviously talk about me. So Ulistic doesn't do any work locally in the local. I think our local client, our nearest client, is in Lakeland, which is about an hour away, and Southern and South Florida. But majority of our clients are, outside of Florida. So that was why we really executed that evacuation plan and the business continuity plan, because it'll be a beautiful day up in Virginia, DC, Maryland, but Florida is picking up the pieces after a hurricane. So that kind of stuff was what drove us to keep the operations running. And like what Brian mentioned a minute ago is sometimes if you're a local business, you could probably weather that storm a little bit from people not coming into your place of business, just for the fact is that they're dealing with their own stuff as well. But for us, we have clientele all over the world, and we need to keep operations running. And needless to say, I think we had a comment, Brian, on Facebook a few weeks ago, like after the storm hit, that one person mentioned that they didn't even notice a blip. So that was a good testimonial for how well we got business back up and running after the storm. If they didn't know I posted something on Facebook, they would have never noticed any difference in the quality or the level of service they got from us.
Well, that's excellent.
And Brian, there was a question for you that came in. You mentioned putting data into a data center like Microsoft Azure or something like what was the other one out there, AWS. should you have a plan in place to back up that, or have a way to get that data security stored somewhere else just in case they have a problem? Because I think wasn't it too long ago that AWS had an outage?
Sure. So that's a very loaded question. So I'll do my best to give a quick overview. So there's a lot of options there. So with with data and backup recovery, essentially, if your systems are destroyed or they go down and they need to be recovered from an actual backup, one, you have to have other systems or other hardware or the ability to spin up additional virtual machines to then basically restore that data to. So there's a number of strategies around that. So if you were in a physical data center, so we have we've been in Lattices in Chicago, and Equinix is our facility here in Ashburn, Virginia. The data, the actual VMs can be there. They can also replicate to another data center, or we can back up the data at a different data center. We also are an Azure partner, as Stuart mentioned. So Microsoft Azure has its own redundancies within their data centers. And so based on what the need is and what I'll say potential costs come into it, their data, the data backs up to multiple East Coast data centers. And then we also have it's called geo-redundant capabilities. So we can also have a high availability solution where there's actual physical servers or physical environments that are in different data centers in different places. Sometimes, to be honest with you, sometimes that is necessary. Sometimes the cost isn't worth it, but it's always worth an evaluation to see the cost benefit analysis. There's always going to be outages at some level, but there's also, you have the capability based on how much you want to invest to make sure that an outage in one place doesn't affect your users or any of your clients, your prospects, your donors, or whoever. So there's a lot of options. It's a good time, to be honest with you. Many of these options weren't available 5-10 years ago, at least, and not even close on a affordability perspective. Most of these types of solutions that we're offering that are now made available through some of the technologies I've talked about were kind of reserved for gigantic billion-dollar organizations who could invest in their own infrastructure that a small business, small medium-sized business is not capable of doing. Now, via some of this kind of software as a service, and some of the infrastructure as a service, like I mentioned, like Azure and the VMs we have in Azure, you have a lot more capabilities, and that's brought to the small, medium-sized business community. And then there's also like kind of in-between solutions too. So we're pretty creative in terms of using what resources or what the budget is and figuring out a creative solution to kind of fulfill it. We were just at one of our I was up there last night or yesterday in New York, and we were talking about different creative ways. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat. So depending on how we want to do it, we tailor that to the best fit for the client's requirements.
So that was quite a lengthy answer, Brian. So
it's a very loaded question. So whoever asked that, I'd be glad to talk more specifically. I know that was a very high level one, but there's a lot of good options that are out there for managing that.
Yeah, and the last question we got, and this was kind of directed to both of us, Brian, was Stuart mentioned the importance of training and making sure that staff are prepared. What would you do as part of a training program? So I'll answer that first. So without sharing too many secrets for my staff members that may be listening, I'm not going to tell when the date's going to be, but we'll plan it into the calendar. But we're going to go through a whole mock scenario of something happening, and making sure that everybody's aware that how they rolling out the SMS groups and the the work remotely type of stuff, and and then see where any holes are in our plan, and just simulate that for a day, and just make sure that from a business continuity plan that everything's firing and doing well, and then next we can fix any gaps in it before a real life scenario happens. But Brian, from you, your side on the technology side, how often should a company test their data restores to make sure they can actually get their data back if a disaster hits?
So we are required to, and we do so for our clients to test all the backup systems and do test restores and all that kind of stuff. So we do that constantly, I'll say, throughout the year. However, some of that, we always like to make recommendations during our technology business reviews, make recommendations on, how to improve that in some of these areas, among others. Sometimes those recommendations are not, are either delayed or not, aren't moved forward with for whatever reason. And so, as your partner, we try to educate, which is part of why we're all here today, but just on what some of those risks are, because just like I had that client that I was talking about before with the water main break, we had recommended a solution for going to a hosted scenario in which they wouldn't have been down at all for years, and there was never a choice to do it. And then as soon as they got back up, the next day they wanted me in the office to talk about that solution again to get back up and going. So, it's one of those things. We do our best to support our clients and do whatever we can test for you. But especially with the training for your staff and the policies around that's a huge important part that I'll say we're not necessarily fully qualified to provide guidance on. But I think that's an important part that most people miss, and they just assume, hey, I got a good technology vendor, we trust them, I'm sure they're taking care of everything. Well, I know from having clients come over to us that oftentimes that's not the case. And even if it is the case, there's a lot of other intricacies that need to be figured out.
Yeah, I was going to add, Brian, don't be like one of those businesses out there that, after an event happens, then it becomes a priority. It's not a matter of if, it's when. And, that's, we see that with cybersecurity, we see that with data backup, we see that with everything that, as you said, Boy Scout model, be prepared, right? So it's going to happen. Ransomware happens, data loss happens. It's better to get that stuff in place before something like that happens. Anyway, Brian, that's all the questions we had. Any last comments before we wrap up?
No, I want to thank everybody for attending, and thank you, Stuart. I know you've been very, very busy over the last month or so. So thank you again for taking the time to be our guest speaker today. We do appreciate our partnership and you for taking the time to come out today. We will be continuing our series, our webinar series, over the next month. I think we have 2 scheduled for next month as well. I think one is on budgeting and one is on, I believe, Dynamics 365. So we will be sending out invites for that. But thank you all for attending, and look forward to meeting up with you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.